July 28th, we're looking at the Bitcoin chart on the 4-hour time frame. Yesterday, I warned you that this week it was going to break this forecast we've been making, the mid-channel area around 64,000, and that's exactly what we've seen. We were expecting it at the beginning of the week, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, but it happened really fast. What we were saying in the forecast, if you watch my videos from previous days, is that it was going to break through the 64,000 zone and then retest it from below. What we saw in the previous days, the previous weeks, was the retest, but from the upper side. Once that initial upward movement finally came to an end, with this high already quite far from the 68,000 zone, in other words, every subsequent high is actually getting further and further away, we started to see that move towards 60,000. What we are going to see throughout this week is the search for 64,000 from below, and then gradually beginning to head back down that path toward much, much lower levels. It will start breaking through supports. What we're seeing are small supports. The most important supports, as you know, are 68,000 and 60,000. I'll explain those to you in detail later, but right now I'm talking about the supports we see on the 15, 30-minute or 1-hour charts, which are smaller, like 62,800, 61,800, 61,200. We'll start to see how it breaks through those and goes back to retest the 64 zone. Until, in a few days, we see the price already settled around the 60,000 area. This could happen during this week, or it might reach 60,000 sometime next week. This forecast isn't just something that comes to mind by simply looking at price action, but rather it's what we do. I'm Mikkel Vazquez, and I've been in professional trading for over 15 years. What I do is look for the clues that the big players leave behind in the market. The big players or institutions are those very small groups of people who move all the charts however they want. That's why many times, if you follow indicators, you'll either be late to the move, or when you enter, the move barely gives you any profit because it's already ending. It's in its final stages, so to speak. What we do is look for the clues that the big players and institutions always leave on the chart with volume. We align ourselves with those moves, we do it on the higher time frames, then we move down to see how one time frame fits into another, and in the end, we make the forecast, just like we've been doing for many months now. We can clearly see that movement with the Wyckoff phases, as I explain in my course. I'll leave you a link in the description with a really significant discount, but without further ado, let's get into the analysis. We already showed the forecast right at the start of the video, but what I want to tell you is that what's behind it is more important than just the forecast itself. Because if you understand what's behind it, how the big players operate, you can apply this methodology to any asset, whether it's Bitcoin in this case, or it could be stocks, oil, gold, metals, whatever you want, because they always work the same way and across all time frames. So let's go ahead and look for what I mentioned about the Wyckoff faces, so we can fit one inside the other, and then we'll get into the volume to see how the big players are reacting at those key points, like support, resistance, and in this case, the middle of the channel, which is extremely important. All right, let's make sure we clearly understand the phase in the long term. We've set it up so that each candlestick represents a week, meaning this is long term. We're looking at 2025, 2026. Each move is very slow because it's long term and we're in an accumulation phase. To be more specific, we're in the downward phase of an accumulation. In other words, it's moving from the resistance point, which was 68,000, though it hasn't reached that on this run, but it's already aiming for 60,000. We have this clear for the long term and the medium term. Once it breaks out of this accumulation, we'll see how Bitcoin tries to reach 80 or 90,000, because the last distribution was very, very small. Now let's go to our headquarters, which is the 4-hour chart, and what we do is set supports and resistances, which is price action, with 60,000 as the key support below. Super important. There has been ever since February, when we saw that selling climax, I don't know if you remember, from that day on, the 60,000 zone has been very important, above the 68,000 zone. And in this channel, ever since it entered the last time, We're talking since June 2nd, when it broke out and started to form this channel. We've seen that the middle of the channel has been the most important area, which is the 64,000 zone. And that's exactly the area it's retesting right now. During the night, today is July 28th, overnight, we've seen how it broke through much more easily than we expected. If you have watched my previous videos, I mentioned that the $64 price zone was growing increasingly stronger, but every single time the price attempts to break through that level, it kind of cracks that support, and then it becomes significantly easier to eventually break right through it. As you can see, it spent quite a while in the 64 zone, and then when it tried again, it broke through in a very, very easy, very drastic way and started looking for other support levels. Now, what we're going to see is a retest of the 64 zone and the beginning of that move. From what we're seeing, what the big players are hinting at is that this move down to 60 is going to be faster than the rise from 60 to the 68 zone. I know it didn't actually reach 68, but we call it a zone because they're not exact lines, they're areas. It's like the 60 zone. Here it dropped down to 58, but we still call it 60 because it's the zone. It's the reference point or the level that gives that move its name. We're talking 60, 68, even if it goes past it, even if it doesn't quite reach it, that's the zone that defines the move. All right, so we'll see that, and a quicker drop to the 60 zone than the climb up to the 68 zone. Anyway, you know I post analysis every day because these clues are fundamental. For example, yesterday we pretty much knew for sure that the 64 was going to break. We said it was going to happen during this week, but as you've seen, it basically broke on the very first day of the week. There are many times when the forecast happens earlier or gets delayed by a few days because the chart has its own movement, its own timing. And what we do is simply adapt to those movements. Keep in mind that the chart is never going to do what you want. The chart is going to do what the big players want. That's why we actively search for those clues, and once we find them, we develop a much clearer understanding, because it's always a search, an intuition of what the major institutional players are doing. We're never going to have 100% certainty about what will happen, but the odds are exceptionally and consistently high. For example, on my Telegram channel, I post my 2 trades every day. And if you're part of the group, you'll see that for a long time now, there have always been profits. That is, all the trades are successful just by applying this methodology on a different time frame. It's 15, 30 minutes, 1 hour at most for scalping or intraday trading. All right, that sounds good. We have that forecast all ready to go for this week. By the end of the week, we'll see that retest of the 64 level and the start of the move. Each time, we'll see lower lows. Just like we saw higher highs here, now we'll see lower lows. You know, the move isn't, we're not going to see a candle suddenly hit 60,000. We don't just enter here and 2 hours later the price is at 60,000. No, trading doesn't work like that. Bitcoin doesn't work like that either. Instead, it plays around in this area. The big players try to trick retail investors, giving them the false impression that the price is going to a certain area, so they'll jump in, and then the big players can take their liquidity, because this is a business where the big players win and retail investors lose. In these videos, with this methodology, what we're trying to do is switch groups. Even though with our capital we'll always be retail, we want to have the mindset of the big players, so we can win like they do, and not lose like retail does. All right, we've set that forecast. Now let's look at those areas I mentioned on the 15 and 30-minute charts. What we need to look for are supports or resistances in these areas. In my course, I explain how to find them perfectly. You specifically need to keep an eye out for those price movements where the price is reversed or demonstrated a clear surge in market activity, along with a substantial increase in trading volume. You can mark them as supports or resistances for that day. Usually, they're only valid for a few days. It's better to draw new ones every day. It doesn't cost you anything, and if you do it, you'll get really good results. You set supports or resistances on the 15, 30-minute, or 1-hour charts at most, and you need to watch how the volume comes in when the price approaches them. If significant volume comes in as it approaches, for example, when it gets close to the 64 resistance or nearby, and you see a big volume spike, and at the same time you spot a Japanese candlestick with an upper wick, those are three elements that will give you a very, very good entry probability. The same applies on the other side. When you see it approaching a support level that you've marked on the 15, 30-minute, or at most 1 hour chart, and those signals appear, that is significant volume, a wick on the Japanese candlestick, and the price actually reaching the support, this will give you the pullback where you can enter easily. Normally, when the movement is bearish, it's always better to go short because you avoid the situation where the pullback doesn't happen. Sometimes, even if you see the signals, or even if the pullback does happen, you might think it's going to last longer than it actually does, and then you run the risk of getting stuck. Normally, it's always better to go short, although there are some pullbacks that are very obvious, and you can get really good results with intraday scalping. All right, now let's take a look at the July challenge. You know that I started in July on July 1st with $500, and every day I make my micro trades, just one each day. Sometimes it's related to the signals I give in the VIP Telegram, other times it's not. And I always go with the trend. That is, if the market is bearish, I try to enter at the most suitable moment. For example, the last trade I made got a bit stuck because we were waiting over the weekend for the support resistance to react. It actually went a little above the resistance, and I got stuck since Saturday. Basically, like I told you yesterday, I was waiting for the price at 64. It reached 64, and I'll show you here the TP that mex.com sent me, and the order has already been executed. You just have to be patient when the price gets a little stuck. This has only happened once all month, and we've come out with profits in any case. Very good. I'll show you how the entry was, how the TP was hit. Now let's take a look at how the account is doing. It's at $986. Very good. Like I told you, as I've said, I started with 500 on July 1st. With these micro trades, I've already practically doubled it without making things complicated at all. So what I'm gonna do is give away the excess. Now it would be $486 to be split among all of you who sign up at mxc.com and make your first deposit. I'm Michael Vasquez, and this is Daily Bitcoin Analysis. Thank you so much for watching this video. And as I always say, this is not financial advice. I'm just sharing my experience with you after more than 15 years in professional trading. Thank you very much for watching me. Stay tuned for tomorrow's video. We're still looking for those clues. Let's see if it retests the 64 zone now, or, on the contrary, if that move is going to take a bit longer. You already know that the chart has its own time frame, but strong hands always leave clues, and we're going to follow those clues one by one. See you soon.